Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show. Taegan, Goddard of Political Wire and David Drucker of Roll Call, the Goppers columnist, joined me immediately because of serial breaking news in Washington these last hours. The President of the United States with the Prime Minister of Great Britain, a press conference earlier in this news cycle, East Coast time, to answer prepared questions about the Benghazi revelations of last week on the Hill, Darrell Ison's committee, and also revelations on Friday, initially moved in a strange back and forth between a spokesperson, a representative of the IRS, Lerner by name, and reporters in a conference call. But now, over these last days and hours, the revelations are coming so fast, full stop. We will also get to one more part, which is the late in the news cycle, East Coast time, revelation that the AP, reporters, editors, offices at the AP were targeted by the Department of Justice, a broad dragnet on telephone lines, digital information, home phones, a wide variety of news gathering modes to investigate a so-called leak with regard to an IED. John Brennan's name is mentioned, counterterrorism czar at the time. He's now DCI. These three stories, freedom of the press, the IRS, that's clearly to have the confidence that as a citizen your records are very well kept and discreet, and then the Benghazi story, national security. I'm going to begin with the AP story because we are members of the media, members of the press. Taegan, I begin with you. The AP story late in the day. I did not see it coming. In fact, when I saw it on the Twitter feed, and I follow Political Wire's Twitter feed very carefully, I thought, they've got this wrong. They're not really talking about the AP. They must be talking about something else. This is the AP reporting on the AP. It puzzled me. What we have so far, Taegan, is that the Justice Department broadly reached out to a whole lot of reporters and editors. Does this look to you to be explainable? Can you say right now national security could cover all this? Good evening, Taegan.
Good evening, John. It truly is a bizarre story, and when it came across, I didn't really know what to make of it either, and I didn't necessarily know whether to believe it or not, but it looks like the Department of Justice secretly spied on the AP reporters over a 2-month period, recording as many as 20 different phone lines associated with the news agency, all in attempts most likely to crack down on internal leaks from the Justice Department. So it was one of these things where, and if you've ever worked in government, as I have, nothing drives people more crazy than leaks, and it's next to impossible to find out who's leaking, but the Justice Department apparently decided that they would make a go of it. But of course, this has backfired horribly on them, and coming at just a terrible time when people are questioning the use of the government in the matter that you mentioned with the Internal Revenue Service. It doesn't come at a good time for the Obama administration. And the White House is probably going to have to respond to this very, very soonly.
Mr. Drucker, good evening to you. The word leak. Leak is associated forever. We didn't have keywords in the 20th century. We were slow. We didn't even have the internet. We didn't have the telephone, but we had keywords. And leak was one of them, entirely associated with Watergate. It's like we're back to the future, David. Leak on an AP story. And I tell you, David, I know you're reporting from out west. The National Press Club president, Angela Greiling-Keane, calls late in the day for the White House to send someone to the National Press Club to explain this AP story. This appears to be a gross violation of press freedom. If there's a good explanation for this, the public has a right to hear it promptly. We're all listening, David. We're not hearing it. This, so far, David, looks to be completely stunning to everybody in Washington. Are you stunned by it? Did you see this coming, David?
No, John. In fact, when I was first asked about this earlier today, I was almost speechless, which was kind of rare for me because it's just not... It's the kind of thing that conspiracy theorists love to say the government is doing, and of course I always say, you're crazy. The government doesn't do stuff like this. It wouldn't make any sense. There's a line that even whoever won't cross. And I think that the administration is going to find that reporters don't like the idea of their freedom of the press and the First Amendment to the Constitution being intruded upon, if you will. And you know, what's interesting here is that the administration, via Mr. Carney, the White House press secretary, immediately distanced the president and the White House from the Department of Justice and said, basically, don't ask us, go ask them.
All right, Taegan, I take David's observation keenly. Immediately, the President of the United States, earlier today with regard to the IRS, said, the first I've learned about it is in the press reports on Friday, like all you did. And then later on, Mr. Carney clarified that the White House counsel had been told of it earlier in the springtime, I believe April 22nd. I might have the date wrong. And we are just dealing with it now, as you all are. And now with the AP story, first we've learned about it is now. Does that mean that the White House has already decided they cannot defend Treasury and they cannot defend justice, that Mr. Holder and Mr. Geithner and Mr. Liu are on their own? Is that the way to read that, Taegan?
I think that's absolutely the way to read it, and I think that most Americans, unlike the situation, say, in Benghazi, where obviously Republicans have seized upon that over the many months, trying to make a big issue of that, unlike that, people do understand this. People do understand an abuse of power by the government, whether true or not, and we don't have all the facts yet. But what we do know is that with regards to the IRS situation, that it was handled, the way that the information came out was handled terribly. I mean, there was a terrible press briefing on Friday where the words, believe it or not, mistakes were made, were uttered, also hearkening back to the Nixon years. And then it took the White House 3 days to respond until President Obama, it took the President 3 days to respond until President Obama made his comments today in the press conference with Prime Minister David Cameron. But then on top of that, to have this story fall right after that, I mean, it's like handing Republicans, handing the keys to the car, as teenagers are the keys to the car. They can't believe what they've just found. They've been trying to make the case that the Obama administration was covering up or bungled the Benghazi situation, and instead it's just dropped into their lap a very easily explainable story about abuse of power. And, like I said, we don't have all the facts yet, but what we do know is that the way that these facts have come out have not been very helpful to the Obama administration.
Mr. Drucker, the Washington Post is reporting that it was not just the Cincinnati office that Ms. Lerner pointed to several days ago in the first of the revelation, but the, quote, Internal Revenue Service officials in Washington and at least 2 other offices were involved with investigating conservative groups seeking tax-exempt status. I add this because I'm in correspondence with ProPublica that has a piece up right now, and I'm going to be talking to ProPublica's Kim Barker tomorrow. ProPublica was provided by the Cincinnati office 31 organizations tax documents. 9 of them, they were all applying for non-prof status. That's why they went through Cincinnati. That's where they looked at you, whether you qualified, answering questions. But 9 of them had not been approved as of the documents being shared to ProPublica, which is an investigative nonprofit itself, often writing articles critical of the Tea Party or of the Republicans or of the way to fundraising has been these last years criticized in Washington. 9 of them were not approved. In other words, they were privileged information. That came late in the day. So what we're dealing with here, David, is a firestorm on Capitol Hill. We have hearings on Friday. You write Goppers. Was the GOP aware of any of this, David? Was anybody? I understand we've been watching Benghazi. We've been watching Sequester, but you talked to a lot of people. Did anybody whisper to you at some point, I still have questions about IRS, David. We've got to get on that. Did you hear that, David?
Nobody was talking about this now, but over the past year and a half, there were whispers of this. One of my colleagues in Roll Call about a year ago or something like that had written about this. The IRS had been questioned about this on Capitol Hill, but there was never any evidence, apparently, of what we've been able to come up with. And the interesting dynamic here, John, and it's what we haven't seen with Benghazi, for instance, but it appears that we're going to see now, is bipartisan, bicameral uproar. And both Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate are all after the same thing, where Benghazi has been completely a House Republican project. And so that really can make it a major issue with legs that gets to the president ultimately as either if you knew, what did you know, and if you didn't know, are you actually running your administration or are you not?
David Drucker of Roll Call, Taegan Goddard of Political Wire. What did the president know and when did he know it? That's the quote from the Watergate years. Right now, we're told by the White House the president didn't know about the IRS. The president didn't know about AP. Right now, the Washington Post is reporting that IRS offices officials in Washington knew. That's a lot closer than Cincinnati to the White House. I'm John Batchelor.